Here beginneth the telling of the second book of the Pergola pump. The second book is called The Scroll. Well, what to tell you so that you can pick it up if you haven't listened to the telling of the first book, which was called Lance. Well, it had been 10 days since Lance had arrived at the door of Violet Elanter Wessex. And Lance, you know all this if you've listened to the first book. Lance was a transcontinental bicyclist, and he was coming from the West Coast to the East Coast, but he had run into trouble. And he was on death's door, really, when he arrived there. But during these 10 days, Violet and her granddaughter, Elaine, whom Violet calls Mandy, and Mandy calls Violet Gma, they together really had managed to heal him. Now, Violet she's a retired, but she'd been an occupational therapist, and before that a first responder, and she'd gone back into the magic that she had of that and had managed to cure him. He was on death's edge because of heat stroke. He could have easily died. It was that close. But he was also injured. He had I think you'd call it a tibia, a dislocated bone in his knee, and he had done something similar to one shoulder. Now you might wonder, how could that happen to a bicyclist? Well, he'd fallen from a tree. And why would a bicyclist be up in a tree? Well, you'll have to just go back to book one, Lance, to find that stuff out. But anyway, he was cured, he was healed, and he'd even completed his trip to the Atlantic, Chesapeake Bay, and was now on his way back to Pennsylvania, Dutch Corner, where his home was. And they'd watched him, the two women had watched him and said their goodbyes, and watched him ride his bike up Astalot Street and then turn left onto Avalon Avenue. And after waving, and he had this bright orange sleeve, which is another thing which it would probably take too much time to explain all that now. But anyway, he had gone. And for the time being, we're going to leave him. But when he had left, now I say they were all changed. Lance really got a new lease on life. As I said, he could have died. The granddaughter, Elaine, she turned 18 during these 10 days, and she had had her heart broken. She'll survive, but this handsome, long, blonde-haired guy there, and she was quite taken with him, but she'd had her heart broken, so she'll recover. And Violet, for her part, she's a craftsman, an artist craftsman, and she was kind of settling into retirement in a way, but things had been reawakened with her, having to go back into her skills, and she was changed as well. And when Lance left, he left two gifts. Now, the two of them, the grandmother and the granddaughter, neither one of them would have accepted payment of any kind for having healed this young man. But he had left with Elaine a musical instrument called a panduri, which she could use because of her ability to speak Georgian and to sing Georgian folk songs in the style of or similar to what the Mandili trio or trio Mandili do. And he decided she needed that. It wasn't as repayment, it was just, he didn't think she'd think to buy one for herself. So when he was in the center of Richland, North Virginia, where this has taken place, he bought one and left that with her. Now, Elaine, or Violet, he left something peculiar with her, and he didn't know if it was good or it was bad. He'd been charged by a guy named Wedge, a real old guy, a mentor of his, to carry this with him on his bicycle ride and to give it to somebody who was worthy. And he didn't even know what it was. But Wedge had said, treat it like the Holy Grail. And he had not really found anybody quite worthy until he got to the Wessex home. And Violet, he found, was worthy. And so he had given it to her with the explanation that he really didn't know what it was. It was about this long, rolled up in thick white plastic, the ends taped, the ends folded in and taped, and he thought of it as the scroll. He didn't know what else to call it. He'd been carrying it in his pannier bags on his bicycle for 3,000 miles. And he turned it over to her, and with the explanation that Wedge had instructed him to do that if he found somebody worthy. What, and I guess one other thing I'll tell you now. There's so much to tell you because all of this is in book one. Uh, uh, there is something else going on quite independent of Lance's arrival, and that was a very troublesome neighbor. This is in the city of Richland, North Virginia, not to be confused with Richmond, Virginia. This is different. And her neighbor, had accused her, not charged her, but accused her of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. And she had a court hearing that was coming up in 3 days. This was Friday, and it was coming up on Monday. And she'd phoned, she was worried. She knew she hadn't done anything like that, but still she was worried. And she'd called a very old friend named Edgy in near Boston, and he was driving his car down to be there to help her. Now this is really, there's more I need to tell you, but I think this is enough to get the story started. So there, the two women they just said goodbye to a guest, and within a couple of hours they expected the arrival of Edgy, a very welcome guest, to help Violet through this trauma that was coming up.